I sat in that Denver courthouse wearing my faded military jacket, watching my own family destroy me piece by piece. My sister Angela stood before the judge, her voice shaking with manufactured emotion as she screamed, "She's just a homeless veteran. She manipulated our dying grandfather." My parents, Harold and Patricia, nodded solemnly beside their expensive lawyer, demanding my grandfather's entire $2.3 million estate. Judge Martinez appeared sympathetic to their carefully rehearsed performance until I quietly rose from my seat. The courtroom fell silent as I walked forward, my boots echoing against marble floors. I placed a single document on his desk. His face transformed from confusion to absolute shock as he read the first line. "Lock the doors," he commanded courthouse security. "No one leaves this room." Growing up in the manicured suburbs of Denver, I learned early that love in the Morrison family came with conditions I could never meet. Angela, 3 years older, was everything our parents, Harold and Patricia, wanted in a daughter. Perfect grades, perfect smile, perfect everything. She glided through Highlands Ranch High School like she owned it, collecting academic awards and homecoming crowns while I struggled to read basic sentences. My dyslexia made every school day a nightmare. While Angela brought home straight A report cards, I brought home notes about my learning disabilities and behavioral problems. Our parents, successful professionals who valued achievement above all else, treated my struggles like personal failures. Harold, a prominent insurance executive downtown, would shake his head at parent-teacher conferences. Patricia, who sold million-dollar homes in Cherry Hills Village, would apologize to my teachers for my lack of effort. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the family motto. Angela absorbed their praise like sunshine while I withered in constant comparison. She got early admission to Emory University with a full scholarship. I barely graduated high school with a 2.1 GPA. When I announced at 18 that I was enlisting in the Army, the family dinner table erupted. Patricia dropped her fork, staring at me like I had announced I was joining a cult. Harold's face turned red with embarrassment. "This is just another way of running away from responsibility, Danette," he said coldly. "Real adults face their problems instead of hiding in the military." Angela, home from her first year at Emory, nodded in agreement. "It's so typical of her to take the easy way out instead of actually trying to improve herself," she said, cutting her salmon into precise pieces. "College requires actual intelligence and discipline." They refused to attend my graduation from basic training at Fort Leonard Wood. While other recruits' families filled the bleachers, my section remained empty. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was building a new life away from their constant disappointment. But the hurt carved deep grooves in my heart that never quite healed. Over the years, Angela's success story continued to unfold exactly as our parents had scripted. Law degree from Emory Partnership at a prestigious Denver firm specializing in estate planning, marriage to Bradley, a successful orthopedic surgeon. Their wedding cost more than most people's houses, held at the Brown Palace Hotel with 400 guests. I was stationed in Afghanistan and couldn't attend, which Angela later told relatives was probably for the best, since I might have caused a scene. Meanwhile, I served 3 tours overseas, earned my sergeant stripes, and learned skills that actually mattered. Combat taught me about loyalty sacrifice and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. But to my family, military service was just an embarrassing phase they hoped I would outgrow. When I returned to Colorado after 8 years of service, they treated me like a stranger at family gatherings. Harold would awkwardly ask about my stint in the military, as if I had spent 8 years at summer camp. Patricia would nervously change the subject whenever I mentioned anything about my deployment experiences. Angela, now a mother of 2 perfect children, would watch me with suspicious eyes, as if my presence somehow threatened her carefully constructed life. The final blow came when I started experiencing PTSD symptoms. Nightmares, panic attacks, difficulty adjusting to civilian life. Instead of offering support, they used my struggles as proof of their long-held beliefs about my fundamental inadequacy. "We always knew she was unstable," Patricia would whisper to neighbors. "The military just made it worse." Only one person in our family understood what I was going through. Grandpa Walter, my father's dad, was a Korean War veteran who had fought his own battles with trauma and family misunderstanding. While the rest of the family saw my struggles as weakness, Walter saw them as the natural cost of service. He became my anchor in a sea of judgment and rejection, the only person who believed I had value beyond their narrow definitions of success. But even Walter kept his support quiet, never challenging Harold and Patricia directly about their treatment of me. At the time, I thought he was just avoiding family conflict. I had no idea he was quietly documenting everything, building a case that would eventually destroy the family that had spent so many years trying to destroy me. Walter Morrison understood war in a way that no one else in our family could comprehend. While Harold had grown up during peacetime prosperity and Patricia had never faced hardship more serious than a difficult real estate closing, Walter carried the weight of real combat experience. Korea had taught him about brotherhood sacrifice and the cost of protecting freedom. He saw those same qualities in me that our family had somehow missed entirely. Our secret relationship began during my basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. While Harold and Patricia refused even to acknowledge my enlistment, Walter drove 10 hours from Denver to attend my graduation ceremony. I spotted his weathered face in the crowd, tears streaming down his cheeks as I received my military occupational specialty assignment. After the ceremony, he pulled me aside with hands that still trembled slightly from old shrapnel wounds. "Your parents don't understand what you've chosen to do," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "But I do. Service is the highest calling a person can answer. Don't let their ignorance make you doubt your worth." He attended every promotion ceremony, every award presentation, every military milestone that my parents ignored. When I made Sergeant Walter was there cheering louder than any proud father. When I received my Bronze Star for Valor during a firefight in Kandahar, he framed the citation and hung it in his den, the place of honor above his own Korean War medals. During my deployments, Walter wrote letters every week, not the awkward, stilted communications my parents occasionally sent, but real conversations about military life, combat stress, and the challenges of serving in hostile territory. He shared stories about his own experiences in Korea, the friends he had lost, the nightmares that still visited him 60 years later. Through his letters, I learned that trauma wasn't weakness, but the price paid by those willing to stand between civilization and chaos. Walter's house in Wheat Ridge became my sanctuary during leave periods. While my parents' home felt like a courtroom where I was perpetually on trial, Walter's place offered unconditional acceptance. We would sit on his back porch drinking coffee and watching the sunrise paint the Rocky Mountains gold, talking about everything except my family's disappointment in my choices. It was during one of these conversations, just 6 months before his death, that Walter revealed the true depth of his understanding about our family dynamics. We had been discussing my struggles with civilian adjustment, my difficulty finding stable employment, my growing sense that I would never measure up to Angela's achievements. "Danette, there are things about your parents and sister that you need to know," he said carefully, setting down his coffee mug with shaking hands. "Things I've been documenting for years, waiting for the right time to act." He led me into his study, a room lined with military memorabilia and family photographs. From a locked filing cabinet, he withdrew a thick folder filled with financial documents, legal papers, and handwritten notes. The contents made my blood run cold. Harold had been systematically embezzling money from his insurance clients for over 5 years, using sophisticated schemes to hide the theft. Patricia had been falsifying property records, claiming veteran status for wealthy clients to secure tax exemptions and favorable loan terms. Most shocking of all, both of them had been using my military service records to file fraudulent claims, telling various agencies that I had died in combat to collect benefits and insurance payouts. Angela's prestigious law practice wasn't built on legal expertise, but on creating false documentation for these schemes. She specialized in estate planning that helped families hide assets and avoid taxes through fraudulent veteran claims. Her entire career was constructed on exploiting the very people I had sworn to protect. They've stolen over $400,000 using your identity alone. Walter explained, his voice heavy with disgust. But that's just the beginning. They're part of a larger network that systematically defrauds veterans and their families across Colorado. Walter had been feeding information to federal investigators for months, building a comprehensive case against the family business built on exploitation and theft. But he needed more evidence, more time to ensure that justice would be thorough and complete. "I'm changing my will," he announced. "Everything goes to you. Not because Harold and Patricia raised a criminal enterprise instead of a family, but because you deserve to inherit from someone who actually understands honor and sacrifice." 3 weeks later, Walter suffered a massive heart attack in his sleep. The doctors said it was peaceful, that he felt no pain. But I knew the truth. The stress of discovering his family's betrayal, the weight of carrying evidence of their crimes, had finally broken his old soldier's heart. At his funeral, Harold and Patricia played the grieving son and daughter-in-law, while Angela delivered a beautiful eulogy about family values and moral character. I watched them perform their grief, knowing what I now knew about their true nature, feeling sick with the knowledge that Walter had died, protecting people who had spent years destroying everything he believed in. The will reading was scheduled for the following week. Walter's attorney, an old Army buddy named Frank Castellano, had strict instructions about timing and revelation. I was to say nothing about the evidence Walter had gathered until the family revealed their true nature through their reaction to the inheritance. Walter's final gift to me wasn't just financial security. It was the chance to watch my family destroy themselves with their own greed and the tools necessary to ensure that their destruction served a greater purpose. Justice for Walter. Justice for me, and justice for every veteran they had exploited in their climb toward wealth and respectability. But first, I had to let them think they were winning. Frank Castellano's law office occupied the top floor of a downtown Denver high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the Rocky Mountains. The conference room where he gathered our family felt more like a boardroom than a place for reading wills, all polished mahogany and leather chairs arranged around a massive table. Harold and Patricia arrived early, dressed in their finest mourning attire, speaking in hushed tones about Walter's surprising decision to handle his affairs so formally. Angela swept in wearing a black designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly income, followed by her husband Bradley, who looked uncomfortable in his expensive tie. They had brought their children, Emma and Connor, apparently believing that cute grandchildren might somehow influence the proceedings. The kids fidgeted in their chairs, clearly bored by adult business they couldn't understand. I arrived last, wearing the only dress clothes I owned, a simple black suit from the Army and Air Force Exchange Service that had seen me through military funerals and formal ceremonies. Patricia's eyes swept over my outfit with barely concealed disdain, while Harold checked his platinum watch and sighed dramatically about military punctuality, meaning arriving just on time instead of early like respectful people. Frank, a distinguished man in his 70s, with Walter's same steady demeanor, opened the proceedings with standard legal language about sound mind and testamentary capacity. But I could see tension building in the family as he moved toward the specific bequests. They had clearly expected this to be a formality, a simple division of Walter's assets among his surviving relatives. The first surprise came when Frank announced the total value of Walter's estate, $2.3 million, in cash investments and real property. Patricia actually gasped, her hand flying to her throat in shock. Harold's eyes widened with calculations I could almost see spinning behind his pupils. Angela leaned forward, suddenly very interested in legal proceedings she had previously considered beneath her attention. "To my beloved granddaughter, Danette Morrison." Frank read his voice carrying no emotion whatsoever. "Who has served her country with honor and distinction. I leave the entirety of my estate, including my home, at 427 Elm Street in Wheat Ridge. My commercial property at 615 17th Street in downtown Denver, and all financial assets held in my name at the time of my death. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the building's air conditioning system humming overhead. Harold's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and rapidly building rage. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Angela stared at Frank as if he had announced that gravity was no longer in effect. There must be some mistake. Harold finally managed his voice tight with controlled fury. My father would never leave everything to someone with such obvious mental health issues. Danette has PTSD, for God's sake. She's completely incapable of managing significant assets. I'm afraid there's no mistake, Frank replied calmly, adjusting his reading glasses. Walter was very specific about his intentions. He met with me multiple times over the past year to ensure his wishes were clearly documented and legally sound. Patricia found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. But we're his family. We took care of him. We visited every weekend. We helped with his medical appointments. Her protests grew louder with each statement building toward hysteria. She barely spoke to him. She was always off playing soldier instead of being here when he needed family support. Angela, recovering from her initial shock, immediately shifted into attorney mode. This will is clearly the product of undue influence, she announced with professional authority. My grandfather suffered from early-stage dementia, and Danette obviously manipulated him during his vulnerable state. We'll be challenging this in probate court immediately. Bradley, who had remained silent throughout the reading, finally spoke up. Maybe we should discuss this privately as a family before making any legal threats, he suggested diplomatically. But Angela shot him a look that could have frozen the Arkansas River, and he quickly retreated back into uncomfortable silence. Frank gathered his papers with the patience of someone who had witnessed family feuds destroy relationships for decades. You're certainly within your rights to challenge the will, he told Angela. However, I should inform you that Walter anticipated such action. He underwent comprehensive psychiatric evaluation just 3 months ago specifically to document his mental competency. Dr. Elizabeth Harper at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital has extensive records demonstrating that Walter was entirely sound of mind when he made these decisions. This information hit Angela like a physical blow. As an estate attorney, she understood the implications of professional psychiatric documentation. Challenging a will backed by recent competency evaluations would be nearly impossible without substantial evidence of fraud or coercion. Harold stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is ridiculous. We're not going to stand here and watch some unstable veteran steal our inheritance. Patricia, call our attorney. Angela, start preparing whatever paperwork you need. We're going to fight this with everything we have. As they gathered their belongings and shepherded the confused children toward the door, Patricia turned back to deliver one final verbal assault. Your grandfather would be ashamed of what you've become, Danette, a homeless drifter who manipulates dying old men for money. At least now everyone will see your true character. After they left, Frank and I sat in the suddenly peaceful conference room. Through the windows, the afternoon sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple that reminded me of sunsets in Afghanistan, moments of beauty that emerged even in the midst of conflict. Walter told me this would happen, Frank said quietly. He prepared extensive documentation about your parents' reaction, their immediate assumptions about your unfitness, their complete lack of concern for his actual wishes. He wanted you to understand exactly what kind of people raised you before you decided how to respond to their attack. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Walter's familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter that began, My dear Danette, if you are reading this, then Harold and Patricia have revealed their true nature, exactly as I predicted they would. The letter contained instructions for the next phase of Walter's plan, including contact information for people who would help me fight back against the family that had never truly accepted me as one of their own. but it also contained something more precious: validation that my instincts about their character had been correct all along, and permission to stop hoping they might someday change. 3 days later, Angela filed a comprehensive legal challenge to Walter's will, alleging mental incompetence, undue influence, and fraud. She also filed an emergency motion to freeze all assets pending the outcome of the probate dispute. Harold and Patricia hired Carson Whitmore, the most expensive probate attorney in Denver, known for his aggressive tactics and willingness to destroy reputations in pursuit of victory. The battle lines were drawn. My family had decided that destroying me was preferable to accepting Walter's judgment about my worthiness to inherit his legacy. But they had no idea that Walter had spent the final months of his life preparing me for this exact confrontation, arming me with weapons they never saw coming. The war was about to begin. The legal assault began immediately and with devastating effectiveness. Within 48 hours of filing their challenge, Harold had contacted my supervisor at Denver International Airport with a detailed account of my dangerous mental instability. As head of security for Terminal B, I had earned respect from colleagues and praise from management for my careful attention to detail and crisis management skills. But Harold painted a picture of an unhinged veteran whose PTSD made her a threat to public safety. She's been having violent outbursts. He told my boss, Regional Security Director James Patterson, during a carefully orchestrated phone call. As her father, I'm genuinely concerned that workplace stress might trigger an episode that could endanger passengers. I've been trying to get her help, but she refuses treatment. I just think you should know what you're dealing with. Patterson called me into his office the following Monday morning. The conversation was awkward and painful, filled with legal disclaimers and corporate liability concerns. He explained that the airport authority couldn't afford to risk any incidents that might compromise passenger safety, especially not with an employee whose own family was raising questions about her stability. I want to be clear, Danette. Patterson said, avoiding eye contact as he delivered the killing blow. Your performance has been exemplary, but given the serious nature of these concerns, we're going to have to place you on administrative leave, pending a full psychological evaluation. The administrative leave became permanent termination when Harold followed up his initial call with a formal letter from Carson Whitmore, threatening legal action if the airport continued employing someone whose documented mental health issues pose a clear and present danger to the traveling public. Patterson, faced with a choice between supporting a good employee and avoiding expensive litigation, chose corporate self-preservation. Patricia's attack on my housing situation proved equally effective and even more personally devastating. She contacted my landlord, Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind elderly woman who had rented me a small apartment in Lakewood despite my limited credit history. Patricia's approach was more subtle than Harold's direct assault, wrapped in expressions of maternal concern and family responsibility. I'm calling about my daughter, Danette, Patricia explained during a tearful phone conversation I later learned about through Mrs. Rodriguez's teenage grandson. She's been going through a very difficult time since returning from the military, and I'm worried she might be using drugs or alcohol to cope with her trauma. Have you noticed any strange behavior? Loud noises at night? Unusual visitors? When Mrs. Rodriguez honestly replied that I had been a model tenant, quiet and respectful and always prompt with rent payments, Patricia shifted tactics. She claimed that I had been making threats against the family that she feared for her safety, and that I might become violent if my living situation gave me a sense of stability and confidence. She needs professional help, Patricia insisted, but she'll never get it as long as she thinks she can maintain this facade of normal living. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is force them to face their problems. Mrs. Rodriguez, genuinely concerned about my welfare and confused by the conflicting picture of me as both perfect tenant and dangerous threat, began watching my activities more closely. When Patricia followed up with stories about property damage at previous apartments and unpaid bills at former residences, the elderly landlord's concern transformed into suspicion and fear. The final blow came when Angela, using her legal credentials and professional letterhead, sent Mrs. Rodriguez a formal notice suggesting that harboring someone with documented violent tendencies and substance abuse issues might expose her to liability if I caused harm to other tenants or damaged the property. The letter was carefully crafted to avoid outright defamation while creating maximum legal intimidation. Mrs. Rodriguez served me with 30-day eviction notice on a Thursday morning, her hands shaking as she delivered the paperwork. "I'm sorry, Mija," she said, tears in her eyes. "Your family says you need help, and I don't know what to believe anymore. Maybe this will make you get the treatment they say you need." The cruelest part of my family's campaign was how they used my military service against me. In a community where veteran status usually commanded respect and support, they systematically transformed my 8 years of honorable service into evidence of mental instability and potential danger. Every sign of discipline became rigidity. Every manifestation of military bearing became threatening behavior. Every indication that combat had affected me became proof that I was fundamentally unfit for civilian life. Harold spread stories at the country club about my episodes, describing fictional incidents where I had supposedly confused family gatherings with combat situations. Patricia told neighbors about my night terrors, claiming I screamed and thrashed in my sleep, sometimes calling out military coordinates or warnings about incoming attacks. Angela shared concerns with other attorneys about veterans who couldn't adjust to civilian legal frameworks, using my case as a cautionary tale about the dangers of PTSD in professional settings. The isolation was complete and suffocating. Neighbors who had previously waved friendly greetings now crossed the street to avoid me. Former co-workers stopped returning my phone calls, clearly uncomfortable with association that might damage their own careers. Even casual acquaintances from the gym or coffee shops began treating me with nervous suspicion, as if my family's campaign had revealed some dangerous truth they should have recognized earlier. Within 2 weeks, I lost both my job and my apartment. With limited savings and no employment prospects, I was forced to live in my pickup truck, a 15-year-old Ford that barely passed emissions testing, but represented my only remaining asset. I showered at the Veterans Center downtown, ate meals at food banks and soup kitchens, and tried to maintain some dignity while my world collapsed around me. The hardest part wasn't the physical discomfort of homelessness, though sleeping in a truck during Colorado winter tested every survival skill I had learned in the military. The hardest part was watching my family's satisfaction as their campaign achieved exactly the results they had intended. Angela would drive past the parking lots where I spent nights, sometimes slowing down to make sure she saw me bedding down in my truck. Patricia made a point of mentioning my situation to former neighbors, expressing fake concern while clearly enjoying the confirmation of her predictions about my inevitable failure. Harold's reaction was the most chilling of all. When a mutual acquaintance mentioned seeing me at the Veterans Center food bank, he simply shrugged and said, "Some people never learn to take responsibility for their own lives. Military discipline only works when someone else is giving the orders. Take that away and people like Danette just fall apart." But even as I struggled with the practical challenges of homelessness and unemployment, a different kind of strength was building inside me. Walter's letter had prepared me for this exact scenario, warning me that my family would attempt to destroy my life, rather than accept his judgment about my character and worthiness. Every attack they launched, every lie they spread, every relationship they poisoned only confirmed his assessment of their true nature. I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance anymore. I was fighting for every veteran they had exploited, every victim of their systematic fraud, every person who had trusted them and been betrayed. Walter had given me more than money or property. He had given me purpose and the tools necessary to transform my suffering into justice. The envelope in my truck contained phone numbers for people who would help me fight back. Detective Sarah Cummings, FBI agent Marcus Chen, attorney Jennifer Walsh. Walter had spent months building a network of allies who understood the scope of my family's criminal enterprise and were prepared to help me expose it. But first, I had to let them think they were winning. I had to let them become so confident in their success that they would make the mistakes that would ultimately destroy them. Walter's strategy required patience, discipline, and the kind of tactical thinking that 8 years of military service had burned into my soul. My family had taught me about betrayal exploitation and the depths of human cruelty. But Walter had taught me about justice honor and the power of careful preparation combined with righteous anger. Soon, it would be time to apply those lessons. 2 months into my homelessness, I received an unexpected call from Frank Castellano asking me to retrieve some personal belongings Walter had stored in my parents' garage. The request seemed strange at first, since I couldn't imagine Walter keeping anything important in a house where he was barely tolerated. But Frank insisted it was essential for the probate proceedings, something about military medals and service records that might influence the court's decision about my fitness to inherit. Harold and Patricia weren't home when I arrived at their sprawling ranch house in Highlands Ranch, giving me the perfect opportunity to search for whatever Walter had hidden among the accumulated debris of suburban prosperity. The garage was filled with the usual collection of forgotten exercise equipment, holiday decorations, and boxes of memories they couldn't quite bring themselves to discard. But tucked behind Patricia's expensive golf clubs, I found a cardboard file box labeled Walter's Military Stuff in Harold's dismissive handwriting. Inside, beneath a layer of Walter's Korean War photographs and medal certificates, lay documentation that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Financial statements, insurance claims, tax documents, all bearing my name and social security number for transactions I had never authorized or even known about. But the most shocking discovery was a manila folder containing death certificates, all listing me as killed in action in Afghanistan, on 3 different dates spanning my actual service period. Harold had been systematically filing false insurance claims using my military records, telling various companies that I had died overseas to collect death benefit survivor payments and policy settlements. He had created an entire fictional narrative of my demise, complete with forged military correspondence and fabricated witness statements from supposed fellow soldiers. The total amount stolen using my identity exceeded $200,000 across 7 different insurance policies I never knew existed. Patricia's crimes were equally sophisticated, but focused on real estate fraud. She had used my veteran status and social security number to purchase properties at below-market prices, claiming veteran disability exemptions and first-time homebuyer benefits reserved for active military personnel. The properties were then quickly resold at massive profits, while she continued claiming tax exemptions based on my supposed residence and veteran status. Her scheme had netted over $150,000 in illegal profits, while simultaneously defrauding federal programs designed to help struggling veterans. But the deepest betrayal came from documents revealing Angela's central role in the criminal enterprise. Her law practice hadn't achieved success through legal expertise, but through systematic exploitation of veteran clients and creation of fraudulent documentation for wealthy families seeking to avoid taxes and legal obligations. She specialized in helping criminals steal veteran identities, file false disability claims, and create shell companies that appeared to be veteran-owned businesses qualifying for federal contracts and tax breaks. Angela's files contained detailed profiles of at least 12 other veterans whose identities had been stolen for various schemes. Some were deceased soldiers whose families never learned about the ongoing fraud. Others were living veterans with PTSD or other conditions that made them unreliable witnesses if they ever discovered the theft. The criminals had specifically targeted vulnerable veterans, knowing their mental health struggles would undermine their credibility if they ever tried to report the crimes. The most sickening discovery was a psychological profile Angela had written about me analyzing my PTSD symptoms and family relationships to determine the best strategies for discrediting me if I ever discovered their operations. She had identified my desire for family acceptance as a weakness they could exploit, predicting that I would blame myself rather than them if I learned about the fraud. The document recommended increasing my isolation and destroying my civilian career prospects to ensure I remained too unstable and financially desperate to pose a threat to their criminal network. But Walter had been watching, documenting, and preparing for years. Mixed in with the evidence of their crimes were copies of letters he had sent to federal investigators, transcripts of phone conversations he had secretly recorded, and detailed timelines connecting my family's criminal activities to a larger network of veteran exploitation spanning multiple states. He had been building a comprehensive case against them while simultaneously protecting me from discovering the truth until he could ensure that justice would be swift and complete. One document explained everything, a handwritten letter from Walter addressed to whoever finds this evidence. He explained that he had discovered the fraud purely by accident when Harold asked him to co-sign a loan application that listed me as deceased. Walter's subsequent investigation revealed the scope of the criminal enterprise and his family's central role in systematically exploiting the very veterans he had spent his life defending and honoring. Harold and Patricia raised children who became criminals, Walter wrote in his careful script, but they also raised a daughter who became a soldier. Danette has the strength and integrity necessary to ensure that justice is served, not just for her own suffering, but for every veteran they have exploited. She needs to understand that this fight is bigger than family betrayal. This is about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Walter had spent the final months of his life feeding information to federal investigators while simultaneously changing his will to ensure I would inherit the resources necessary to fight back effectively. He had anticipated my family's reaction to the inheritance, their immediate attempts to destroy my credibility and stability, and their overconfidence that would eventually lead to mistakes exposing their criminal operations. The evidence was overwhelming, but it was also incomplete. Walter's investigation had identified the existence of a larger criminal network, but hadn't fully mapped its scope or identified all the participants. That work would require federal resources, professional investigators, and most importantly, an inside witness who understood how the system operated and had access to records that could connect all the pieces. As I sat in my parents' garage surrounded by evidence of their systematic betrayal of everything Walter had taught me to value, I finally understood the true purpose of my inheritance. Walter hadn't just given me money or property. He had given me the tools and responsibility to complete his mission of protecting veterans from the very family that had spent years using my service as a weapon against me. But first, I needed to contact the people Walter had trusted to help me transform this evidence into justice. Detective Sarah Cummings, FBI agent Marcus Chen attorney Jennifer Walsh. Each had been carefully selected for their expertise in veteran exploitation cases and their commitment to seeing justice served regardless of the perpetrator's social standing or professional reputations. The discovery changed everything. This wasn't just about my inheritance or even my family's betrayal of me personally. This was about a criminal conspiracy that had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from programs designed to help veterans exploited the identities of soldiers who had sacrificed for their country and systematically targeted the most vulnerable members of the military community. Walter's final gift wasn't financial security. It was the opportunity to transform my pain into purpose, my family's betrayal into protection for countless other veterans who deserved better than exploitation and fraud. The battle ahead would be difficult and dangerous, requiring me to face people who had already demonstrated their willingness to destroy my life to protect their criminal enterprise. But I was ready. 8 years of military service had taught me about mission completion strategic thinking and the importance of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. My family had trained me in betrayal and cruelty, but Walter had trained me in justice and honor. The war was about to begin in earnest, and this time I would be fighting with more than hope and determination. I would be fighting with evidence, federal support, and the accumulated weight of every veteran my family had victimized in their climb toward wealth and respectability. They had taught me about suffering. Now it was time to teach them about consequences. Detective Sarah Cummings operated out of the Denver Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, a cramped office space that smelled like coffee and determination. When I called the number Walter had provided explaining that I had evidence related to veteran exploitation and insurance fraud, she agreed to meet me that same afternoon. Sarah turned out to be a woman in her early 40s, with her father's military bearing and her mother's intuitive understanding of criminal psychology. Walter Morrison was my father's squad leader in Korea, she explained after I introduced myself and produced the box of evidence. Dad always said Walter saved his life twice, once from enemy fire and once from his own demons when he came home. When Walter contacted me 6 months ago about suspicious activity involving his family, I knew it was serious. Sarah examined the documents with professional thoroughness, occasionally whistling softly at particularly egregious examples of fraud and identity theft. Her expertise in financial crimes allowed her to immediately recognize patterns and connections that would have taken me hours to understand. Within 30 minutes, she had identified links between my family's operations and several other cases her unit had been investigating. "This is much bigger than your family," she said, spreading bank records across her desk like pieces of a complex puzzle. "We've been tracking a veteran exploitation network across Colorado for over a year, but we couldn't connect all the pieces. Your evidence provides the missing links we needed to understand how the entire system operates." She pulled out files on 12 other cases involving stolen veteran identities, fraudulent disability claims, and fake veteran-owned businesses receiving federal contracts. The pattern was always the same: vulnerable veterans targeted for identity theft, wealthy criminals using veteran status to avoid taxes and legal obligations, and sophisticated legal documentation that made the schemes appear legitimate to casual inspection. "Your sister Angela's law practice appears to be the center of the network." Sarah continued, pointing to recurring legal signatures across multiple fraudulent documents. "She's been creating false paperwork for criminals throughout the state, helping them exploit veteran programs and steal identities. But we needed someone with inside knowledge of her methods to help us build a comprehensive case." Sarah picked up her phone and dialed a number from memory. "Marcus, I've got that witness Walter Morrison promised us. Can you get over here this afternoon? Yes, she has the evidence, all of it." FBI agent Marcus Chen arrived within an hour, a serious man in his 30s who specialized in federal fraud investigations involving military personnel and veteran benefits. His expertise in federal crimes and interstate criminal networks brought an entirely new dimension to the investigation that local police couldn't provide. When Sarah showed him Walter's evidence, his reaction was immediate and decisive. "This is exactly what we needed to move forward with federal charges," Marcus said, photographing key documents with professional equipment that would preserve them as admissible evidence. "The interstate nature of these crimes, the federal programs involved, and the organized nature of the conspiracy all fall under federal jurisdiction. Your family has been committing felonies that could result in decades of prison time." Marcus explained that the FBI had been investigating veteran exploitation networks across multiple states, following money trails and communication patterns that suggested organized criminal activity rather than isolated incidents of fraud. Walter's evidence provided crucial proof that the networks were connected and systematically targeting veterans based on their vulnerabilities and mental health challenges. "The psychological profiles your sister created represent a particularly heinous aspect of these crimes." Marcus continued, his voice tight with anger. She was literally teaching criminals how to exploit veteran trauma and family dysfunction to steal identities and avoid detection. That level of premeditation and callousness will ensure severe federal charges. The final member of my support team was attorney Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in veteran advocacy and federal criminal defense. Sarah and Marcus had worked with her on previous cases involving systematic exploitation of military personnel, and they trusted her commitment to ensuring that veteran victims receive both justice and proper support throughout the legal process. Jennifer arrived at Sarah's office carrying a briefcase full of legal precedents and case files from similar investigations. Her expertise in federal court procedures and veteran law would be essential for navigating the complex legal challenges ahead. But more importantly, her experience with veteran trauma and family exploitation meant she understood the emotional aspects of my situation as well as the legal implications. Walter Morrison contacted me 3 months ago. Jennifer revealed setting her briefcase on Sarah's cluttered desk. He wanted to ensure that when this investigation became public, you would have legal representation that understood both the federal charges and the family dynamics involved. He was very specific about protecting you from retaliation and ensuring that your PTSD wouldn't be used against you during the proceedings. Jennifer explained that Walter had anticipated every aspect of the coming legal battle, from my family's attempts to discredit my mental health to their efforts to claim innocence and shift blame to other participants in the criminal network. He had prepared detailed strategies for countering their defense arguments while simultaneously protecting me from the kind of psychological warfare they had already demonstrated during the inheritance dispute. The most important thing Walter wanted you to understand, Jennifer said, pulling out a sealed letter with my name written in Walter's distinctive handwriting, is that this investigation will require tremendous courage and persistence. Your family will escalate their attacks on your credibility and mental health as they become more desperate, but you won't be facing them alone. The letter from Walter was both a warning and an inspiration, preparing me for the difficult path ahead, while reassuring me that every step had been carefully planned to ensure ultimate victory. He had assembled a team of professionals who shared his commitment to protecting veterans and ensuring that criminals faced appropriate consequences for their exploitation of military service and sacrifice. Your parents and sister believe they can destroy you because they've never seen you as a soldier, Walter wrote. They see only the child they rejected, the disappointment they created through their own failures as parents and human beings. But Sarah, Marcus, and Jennifer see what I see, a combat veteran with the strength and integrity necessary to complete this mission. Over the following days, my new allies taught me about federal investigation procedures, courtroom strategies, and the legal protections available to witnesses in federal criminal cases. They also helped me understand that my family's escalating attacks on my credibility were actually evidence of their guilt and desperation tactics that would ultimately strengthen the federal case against them. But most importantly, they helped me realize that Walter's plan extended far beyond punishment for my family's crimes. The investigation would expose a criminal network that had exploited hundreds of veterans across multiple states, leading to systemic reforms in veteran benefit programs and stronger protections against identity theft and fraud. This case will set precedents that protect veterans for decades, Marcus explained during one of our planning sessions. Your courage in coming forward and testifying against your own family will save countless other veterans from similar exploitation. Sarah nodded in agreement. Walter didn't just want justice for you personally. He wanted to ensure that no other veteran's family could use their service against them the way yours has. This investigation will create new federal guidelines for protecting veteran identities and detecting fraudulent claims. Jennifer added the final piece of Walter's strategy. He also wanted you to understand that rebuilding your life after this investigation will require more than financial resources. That's why he structured his will to provide not just inheritance, but ongoing support for your transition back to civilian success. He believed you had the potential to help other veterans if given the proper resources and support network. As we prepared for the next phase of the investigation, I finally understood the true scope of Walter's final mission. He hadn't just documented evidence of criminal activity. He had assembled a team of dedicated professionals, prepared comprehensive strategies for federal prosecution, and ensured that my personal recovery would serve a larger purpose of protecting other veterans from similar exploitation. The battle ahead would test every skill I had learned in 8 years of military service. But for the first time since discovering Walter's evidence, I wasn't fighting alone. I had allies who understood both the legal complexities and the personal stakes involved in taking down a criminal network that had built its wealth on exploiting the very people they should have been honoring and protecting. My family had taught me about betrayal and exploitation, but Walter had taught me about mission planning, strategic thinking, and the power of assembling the right team for complex operations. The investigation was about to move from evidence gathering to active prosecution, and I was ready to complete the mission Walter had spent his final months preparing. The federal investigation had been underway for 3 weeks when my family launched their most vicious assault yet. Harold, growing increasingly paranoid about my sudden disappearances, for meetings with investigators, hired a private detective named Rick Sawyer to follow my movements and report on my activities. Sawyer's surveillance revealed my regular visits to the police station FBI field office and Jennifer Walsh's downtown law firm, providing Harold with enough information to realize that their criminal enterprise was under serious federal investigation. Rather than retreat or attempt to cover their tracks, my family chose escalation. Harold, Patricia, and Angela held an emergency meeting at Angela's law office, where they developed a strategy designed to destroy my credibility before I could testify against them. The plan was simultaneously desperate and ruthless, targeting my mental health, criminal history, and personal relationships in ways calculated to make me appear as an unreliable witness motivated by jealousy and psychiatric instability. The first phase of their attack involved filing false police reports, claiming I had burglarized their homes and threatened their physical safety. Harold contacted Denver police with a detailed story about discovering me in his garage at 2 a.m, rummaging through family documents and muttering threats about making them pay for what they've done. His account included descriptions of my wild, unfocused eyes and incoherent rambling about military justice and combat revenge. Patricia corroborated Harold's story with her own report about a separate incident, claiming I had appeared at her workplace and terrorized her colleagues with graphic descriptions of battlefield violence before making specific threats against her personal safety. She provided witness statements from co-workers who supposedly heard me describe various methods of killing enemies during combat statements that were later revealed to be completely fabricated. Angela's contribution was the most sophisticated and potentially damaging. Using her legal expertise and professional connections, she arranged for a psychiatric evaluation by Dr. William Kramer, a psychiatrist known for his willingness to diagnose veterans with severe mental illnesses based on minimal evidence. Dr. Kramer's report, filed as supporting evidence for the criminal charges, described me as suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder with paranoid delusions and violent ideation. The psychiatric evaluation was based entirely on information provided by my family, including fabricated stories about my behavior during family gatherings, false accounts of threats I had allegedly made, and distorted interpretations of normal military training as evidence of dangerous psychological conditioning. Dr. Kramer never interviewed me personally, but claimed his diagnosis was supported by extensive family testimony and documented behavioral incidents. To make their fabricated charges appear more credible, Angela arranged for fake physical evidence to support claims of assault and intimidation. Patricia visited an emergency room claiming that I had grabbed and shaken her during a confrontation, showing bruises that were actually self-inflicted but photographed as evidence of violent assault. She gave a tearful account to medical personnel about fearing for her life and wanting to protect her family from someone she described as completely unhinged and dangerous. Harold supplemented the assault charges with claims that I had stolen family documents during my alleged break-in, providing a list of missing items that included financial records, insurance policies, and legal documents related to Walter's estate. His story suggested that my theft was motivated by desperate attempts to find evidence supporting my inheritance claims, portraying me as someone whose mental illness had progressed to criminal behavior. The cumulative effect of their coordinated campaign was devastating. Within 48 hours, I was facing charges for burglary, assault, theft, and making terrorist threats. The allegations were serious enough to result in a warrant for my arrest, and the supporting psychiatric evaluation suggested that I posed an ongoing danger to public safety that justified immediate incarceration rather than release on bail. Detective Sarah Cummings called me at 6 a.m. to warn that patrol officers were looking for me with instructions to arrest me on site. "This is obviously retaliation for your cooperation with our investigation," she explained, "but we need to handle this carefully to protect the federal case. If you're arrested and held without bail, it becomes much harder for us to prepare your testimony." Jennifer Walsh arranged for me to surrender voluntarily at the downtown courthouse, accompanied by her legal representation and a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the same psychiatrist who had documented Walter's mental competency. Dr. Harper's evaluation directly contradicted Dr. Kramer's findings, describing me as a combat veteran experiencing normal adjustment challenges, but showing no signs of paranoid delusions, violent ideation, or psychiatric instability. The contrast between the two psychiatric evaluations exposed my family's strategy of using mental health accusations as weapons against veterans who pose threats to their criminal operations. Dr. Harper's report noted that family members often used PTSD diagnoses to discredit veterans who discovered evidence of exploitation, a pattern she had observed in several other cases involving veteran fraud. Despite Jennifer's efforts to arrange reasonable bail conditions, Judge Patricia Hendricks was influenced by the severity of the charges and Dr. Kramer's alarming psychiatric assessment. She ordered me held in Denver County Jail pending psychological evaluation describing me as potentially dangerous to both my family and the broader community. The 3 days I spent in county jail were among the most difficult of my life. The overcrowded facility, constant noise, and institutional atmosphere triggered PTSD symptoms that I had been successfully managing for months. Panic attacks, insomnia, and hypervigilance made it nearly impossible to function normally, creating exactly the kind of psychiatric instability my family had falsely claimed already existed. But even in the depths of that concrete and steel nightmare, I could feel Walter's influence guiding my response to their escalation. His letters had prepared me for exactly this situation, warning that desperate criminals often attempt to destroy their accusers rather than defend against accusations. He had specifically instructed me to document every aspect of their retaliation for use as evidence of consciousness of guilt in the federal case. Jennifer Walsh worked around the clock to expose the fabricated nature of the charges against me. Her investigation revealed that Patricia's emergency room visit occurred at a time when I was meeting with FBI agent Marcus Chen, providing an unshakable alibi for the alleged assault. Security cameras at Harold's workplace proved that I had never been in his building, contradicting his claims about threatening behavior in professional settings. Most damaging to my family's credibility, Jennifer discovered that Dr. Kramer had received a substantial payment from Angela's law practice just days before providing his psychiatric evaluation. The financial connection between the allegedly independent medical assessment and my sister's legal strategy exposed the coordinated nature of their attack on my mental health and credibility. After 3 days of investigation, the charges against me were dropped due to lack of evidence and clear proof of fabrication. Judge Hendricks issued a formal apology for the wrongful incarceration, but the damage to my psychological well-being had already been accomplished. My family had successfully demonstrated their willingness to destroy my life, using the full power of the legal system regardless of truth or justice. However, their escalation had also provided federal investigators with crucial evidence of consciousness of guilt and obstruction of justice. Fabricating criminal charges against a federal witness represented serious additional felonies that would enhance their eventual sentences and eliminate any possibility of claiming innocence about the original fraud charges. This was actually perfect for our case, Agent Marcus Chen explained during our debriefing after my release. When criminals resort to witness intimidation and false charges, it proves they know they're guilty and are desperate to avoid prosecution. Your family just handed us additional federal charges while proving that their original crimes were intentional rather than accidental mistakes. Sarah Cummings added that the investigation had revealed connections between Dr. Kramer and several other fraudulent psychiatric evaluations used to discredit veterans who had discovered evidence of exploitation. His collaboration with my family was part of a broader pattern of using mental health accusations as weapons against vulnerable veterans. Your family's attack on you will actually help us protect other veterans, Sarah continued. We can now demonstrate that these criminal networks specifically target veteran mental health as a method of avoiding prosecution and discrediting their victims. As I left the county jail wearing the same clothes I had worn during my surrender 3 days earlier, I realized that my family had made their fatal mistake. Their desperate escalation had transformed them from clever criminals into obvious defendants, whose guilt was now undeniable even to sympathetic observers. Walter's strategy was working exactly as he had planned. My family's overconfidence and desperation had led them to commit new crimes while attempting to cover up their original offenses. They had revealed their true character not just to federal investigators, but to judges, medical professionals, and law enforcement officers who would remember their tactics when it came time for sentencing and testimony. The battle was intensifying, but the outcome was becoming clearer with each desperate attack they launched. They had taught me about cruelty and betrayal, but Walter had taught me about patience, strategic thinking, and the ultimate triumph of truth over deception. Soon it would be time to complete the mission he had spent his final months preparing. Over the following 6 weeks, the federal investigation expanded into the largest veteran exploitation case in Colorado history. FBI agent Marcus Chen assembled a task force that included investigators from the Department of Veterans Affairs Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division, and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Colorado. The scope of the criminal enterprise far exceeded even Walter's comprehensive documentation, reaching into multiple states and affecting hundreds of veterans across the Mountain West region. Marcus established a command center in the federal building downtown with wall-mounted charts, tracking the flow of stolen money, fraudulent documents, and criminal connections that extended from Denver to Phoenix to Salt Lake City. My family's operation served as the hub for a network that had systematically exploited veteran programs and benefits for over 7 years, generating millions of dollars in illegal profits through sophisticated identity theft and document fraud. Harold and Patricia weren't just running a family business, Marcus explained during one of our daily briefings. They were the regional coordinators for a criminal organization that specifically targeted veterans with mental health challenges, family problems, or financial difficulties. Your case helps us understand how they identified vulnerable targets and exploited their situations. The investigation revealed that my family had developed psychological profiles for over 40 veterans, analyzing their trauma symptoms, family relationships, and economic circumstances to determine the best methods for stealing their identities and discrediting them if they discovered the theft. Angela's law practice had created standardized procedures for this exploitation, training other attorneys and administrative staff to recognize and target vulnerable veterans in their communities. Sarah Cummings led the financial investigation tracing money laundering operations that converted stolen veteran benefits into legitimate business investments, real estate purchases, and offshore accounts. Her analysis revealed that Patricia's real estate success was built entirely on fraudulent transactions, using stolen veteran identities, while Harold's insurance business served as a front for converting fake death benefits into investment capital. Every major asset your parents own was purchased with money stolen from veterans, Sarah reported during our weekly case review. Their house, their vacation property in Aspen, their investment portfolio, even their children's college funds were built on systematic fraud against the military community. The most disturbing discoveries involved Angela's legal practice and its connections to other professionals who facilitated veteran exploitation. Dr. William Kramer, the psychiatrist, who had provided false testimony about my mental health, was part of a network that included medical professionals, social workers, and government employees who helped identify vulnerable veterans and create documentation supporting fraudulent benefit claims. Jennifer Walsh coordinated with federal prosecutors to ensure that my testimony would be protected from the kind of retaliation my family had already demonstrated. Her work involved not just legal preparation, but psychological support to help me process the trauma of discovering that my entire family had built their lives on exploiting people like me. The hardest part for veteran witnesses is accepting that their families use their service against them, Jennifer explained during one of our preparation sessions. It challenges everything they believed about honor, loyalty, and family bonds. We need to help you understand that your family's betrayal reflects their moral failures, not any weakness or inadequacy on your part. As we prepared for the grand jury testimony that would result in federal indictments, Jennifer worked with Dr. Elizabeth Harper to document the psychological impact of my family's systematic abuse and exploitation. Their analysis revealed patterns of emotional manipulation, gaslighting, and identity theft that constituted a form of domestic terrorism, specifically targeting my military service and veteran status. Your family didn't just steal your identity, Dr. Harper explained during one of our sessions. They systematically destroyed your sense of self-worth and family belonging to make you easier to exploit. The fact that you survived their psychological warfare and maintained your commitment to truth and justice demonstrates remarkable resilience and character. The federal case also benefited from cooperation with veteran advocacy organizations that had been tracking similar exploitation patterns across the country. The Disabled American Veterans of foreign wars and Iraq and Afghanistan. Veterans of America all provided support for the investigation while helping identify additional victims who'd been exploited by the same criminal network. Colonel James Richardson, a retired Army officer who directed veteran advocacy for the Colorado National Guard, became an important ally in preparing my testimony and understanding the broader implications of the case. His experience with veteran exploitation and family dysfunction helped contextualize my family's behavior within larger patterns of civilian misunderstanding and exploitation of military service. What your family did to you represents the worst possible betrayal of military values, Colonel Richardson explained. They took your service sacrifice and trauma and transformed them into weapons against you. This case will help us develop better protections for veterans against exactly this kind of exploitation. The preparation also involved extensive documentation of my own military service combat experiences and adjustment challenges to counter any attempts by defense attorneys to portray me as an unreliable witness motivated by mental illness or family resentment. Military records, medical evaluations, and testimonials from fellow veterans created a comprehensive picture of my character and credibility that would withstand aggressive cross-examination. Master Sergeant Lisa Thompson, my former squad leader from Afghanistan, flew to Denver specifically to provide testimony about my combat performance and post-deployment adjustment. Her willingness to travel across the country for the case demonstrated the military community's commitment to protecting veterans from the kind of exploitation my family had perpetrated. Danette was one of the most reliable soldiers I ever served with, Master Sergeant Thompson stated in her formal affidavit. She protected her fellow soldiers and completed every mission with honor and distinction. If she says her family exploited her service, then that's exactly what happened. Her word is worth more than any civilians, especially civilians who never wore the uniform or understood the sacrifice. As the investigation neared completion, Marcus Chen estimated that federal charges would include racketeering, conspiracy identity, theft, wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. The enhanced penalties for crimes targeting veterans could result in sentences exceeding 20 years in federal prison for each family member. This case will set precedents for protecting veterans from family exploitation and identity theft, Marcus explained. Your courage in testifying against your own family will help us develop new federal guidelines for investigating and prosecuting these crimes. Sarah Cummings added that the financial recovery would extend far beyond my personal situation. We've identified over $2 million in stolen assets that will be returned to veteran programs and individual victims. Your family's criminal enterprise will actually end up providing resources to help other veterans recover from similar exploitation. The final phase of preparation involved coordination with the U.S. Attorney's Office to ensure that the prosecution would seek maximum sentences, while also requiring my family to cooperate in identifying and prosecuting other members of the criminal network. Federal prosecutors had evidence linking the operation to similar schemes in 6 other states, potentially resulting in one of the largest veteran exploitation prosecutions in American history. Walter Morrison's investigation didn't just document crimes against you, Federal Prosecutor Amanda Stevens explained during our final preparation meeting. He provided the foundation for dismantling an entire criminal network that has been exploiting veterans for years. Your testimony will help us protect thousands of veterans who might otherwise become victims of similar schemes. As we approach the grand jury proceedings that would result in federal indictments, I finally understood the full scope of Walter's final mission. He hadn't just sought justice for my individual situation. He had prepared a comprehensive strategy for protecting the entire veteran community from systematic exploitation and abuse. The case would test every skill I had learned during 8 years of military service, requiring courage under fire tactical thinking, an unwavering commitment to mission completion. But unlike my tours in Afghanistan, this mission had the support of federal law enforcement, experienced prosecutors, and veteran advocacy organizations committed to ensuring that justice would be thorough and complete. My family had taught me about betrayal exploitation and the depths of human cruelty, but Walter had taught me about strategic planning, careful preparation, and the ultimate triumph of justice over criminal conspiracy. Soon it would be time to complete the mission he had spent his final months preparing, transforming years of suffering into protection for countless other veterans who deserved better than exploitation and fraud. The probate court hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late October, exactly 6 months after Walter's death, and 3 months after the federal investigation had begun building its comprehensive case against my family's criminal enterprise. Judge Thomas Martinez presided over Courtroom 4C in the Denver District Court building, a formal chamber with dark wood paneling and high windows that cast autumn sunlight across rows of wooden benches filled with observers, attorneys, and family members. Carson Whitmore had transformed the inheritance dispute into a multimedia presentation designed to convince Judge Martinez that I was fundamentally unfit to manage significant assets due to combat-related mental illness and a pattern of unstable behavior that endangered both my family and the broader community. His strategy involved character assassination through psychiatric testimony, financial irresponsibility claims, and carefully selected witnesses who would paint me as a dangerous veteran whose trauma had progressed to criminal behavior and delusional thinking. Harold and Patricia arrived dressed in their finest mourning attire, playing the roles of grieving relatives whose beloved father had been manipulated by an unstable granddaughter during his vulnerable final months. Harold wore a charcoal suit with Walter's Purple Heart medal pinned to his lapel, a gesture of fake respect that made my stomach turn with revulsion. Patricia carried tissues and wore her most expensive black dress, preparing for a performance of maternal concern and family protection. Angela swept into the courtroom wearing a tailored navy blue suit that projected professional competence and legal authority. She had prepared extensive documentation supporting their claims about my mental instability, including the fabricated psychiatric evaluation from Dr. William Kramer and falsified police reports about my alleged criminal behavior. Her confident demeanor suggested absolute certainty that their carefully orchestrated campaign would succeed in overturning Walter's will and seizing control of his estate. Carson Whitmore's opening statement painted a picture of a tragic family torn apart by one member's inability to cope with the psychological consequences of military service. He described Walter as a vulnerable elderly man whose love for his granddaughter had been exploited during a period of declining mental capacity and increasing isolation from his son and daughter-in-law, who had always provided responsible oversight of his affairs. Walter Morrison was a proud veteran who understood the sacrifices made by our military personnel. Whitmore told Judge Martinez with practiced sincerity, but his compassion for his granddaughter's struggles blinded him to her increasing instability and manipulative behavior. This will represent not his true wishes, but the result of systematic exploitation by someone whose combat trauma has progressed to dangerous delusions and criminal activity. Whitmore's presentation included blown-up photographs of my arrest record emergency room reports documenting Patricia's fabricated injuries and Dr. Kramer's psychiatric evaluation, concluding that I suffered from severe PTSD with paranoid delusions and violent ideation. He argued that allowing me to inherit significant assets would enable continued criminal behavior while denying resources to family members who had demonstrated stability, responsibility, and genuine concern for Walter's welfare. The parade of character witnesses began with neighbors who testified about my erratic behavior and threatening demeanor during recent months. Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down described seeing me lurking around the neighborhood at strange hours, muttering to myself and staring at my family's windows in a way that made us fear for our safety. Her testimony was based entirely on stories Patricia had told her, but she delivered it with convincing concern about community security. Dr. Kramer took the witness stand wearing his most professional suit and carrying a thick file of documentation, supporting his psychiatric conclusions. His testimony described me as suffering from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, complicated by paranoid delusions, substance abuse issues, and a concerning pattern of threats against family members who had tried to provide support and intervention. His evaluation was based entirely on information provided by my family, but he presented it with the authority of professional medical expertise that would be difficult for Judge Martinez to ignore without contradictory evidence from equally credible sources. Dr. Kramer recommended court-supervised mental health treatment and family oversight of any financial resources as necessary protections for both my welfare and public safety. Angela's testimony was the emotional centerpiece of their presentation, delivered with tears and trembling voice, as she described her fear for her children's safety in the presence of their unstable aunt, who had made graphic threats about military justice and combat revenge. She painted herself as a loving sister whose attempts to help had been met with increasing hostility and dangerous behavior. "I've tried so hard to support Danette through her adjustment challenges." Angela sobbed, dabbing her eyes with tissues while maintaining eye contact with Judge Martinez. "But her condition has deteriorated to the point where I genuinely fear for my family's safety." She describes battlefield violence in graphic detail and talks about applying military tactics to civilian conflicts. My children shouldn't have to live in fear because their aunt can't distinguish between war zones and family gatherings. Patricia's testimony focused on Walter's declining mental capacity during his final months, describing him as increasingly confused and susceptible to manipulation by anyone who showed him attention and affection. She claimed that I had systematically isolated him from family members who might have recognized signs of undue influence or cognitive decline. Walter was so lonely and vulnerable after his wife died, Patricia explained with practiced emotion. Danette took advantage of that loneliness, filling his head with stories about family rejection and military sacrifice that played on his own combat experiences. She knew exactly how to manipulate his emotions and memories to turn him against his own son and daughter-in-law, who had cared for him for years. Harold's testimony connected my alleged instability to broader patterns of irresponsible behavior and poor judgment that made me unfit to manage significant assets or make important decisions about family welfare. He described fictional incidents of financial irresponsibility, reckless driving and confrontational behavior at family gatherings that suggested ongoing deterioration in my mental health and judgment. "We've watched Danette struggle with civilian adjustment for years," Harold stated with fake paternal concern. "Every time we tried to help, she became more hostile and suspicious, as if our concern was somehow threatening to her. Now she's convinced herself that our family is involved in some kind of conspiracy against her. It's heartbreaking to see what war has done to our daughter's mind." As the testimony proceeded, I sat quietly beside Jennifer Walsh, wearing my dress uniform with Walter's Bronze Star Medal and my own military decorations clearly displayed. Jennifer had advised me to let my family reveal their true character through their own words before presenting our defense, knowing that their overconfidence would lead them to make statements that could later be used against them in federal court. Judge Martinez appeared increasingly sympathetic to their narrative of family concern versus individual instability. The accumulated weight of psychiatric testimony, police reports, and character witnesses created a compelling picture of a veteran whose combat trauma had progressed to dangerous delusions and criminal behavior that threatened both family welfare and community safety. But I remained calm throughout their presentations, knowing that Walter's strategy required patience and careful timing. My family believed they were winning, that their carefully orchestrated campaign of character assassination had successfully destroyed my credibility and fitness to inherit Walter's legacy. Their confidence was about to become their downfall. Carson Whitmore concluded his presentation with a formal request that the court declare Walter's will invalid due to undue influence and testator incompetence, award his entire estate to Harold and Patricia as his natural heirs, and order comprehensive psychiatric evaluation and possible involuntary commitment for my protection and public safety. As he returned to his seat, Harold nodded approvingly at Patricia, who squeezed Angela's hand in satisfaction. They believed they had won, that their systematic destruction of my reputation had achieved its intended goal of seizing Walter's assets while eliminating any possibility that I could challenge their criminal enterprise. But Jennifer Walsh was already standing, walking toward Judge Martinez's bench with a manila envelope that would transform their moment of triumph into the beginning of their destruction. The federal investigation was about to become public knowledge, and my family's overconfidence was about to collide with the reality of Walter's final strategy. The war was about to reach its climactic moment, and this time the weapons would be truth, justice, and the accumulated weight of evidence that Walter had spent his final months carefully preparing for exactly this confrontation. The momentum in courtroom 4C seemed entirely in my family's favor as Carson Whitmore delivered his closing arguments with theatrical confidence. He gestured toward the stack of psychiatric evaluations, police reports, and character testimonials that painted me as a dangerous veteran whose combat trauma had devolved into criminal behavior and delusional thinking about family conspiracies. Judge Martinez nodded thoughtfully at several key points, appearing convinced by the accumulated evidence of my alleged unfitness to inherit Walter's substantial estate. Emboldened by their apparent success, my family made the fatal mistake that Walter had predicted they would make. Instead of simply requesting that the will be overturned and the estate transferred to Harold and Patricia, they escalated their demands to include comprehensive control over my personal life and financial future. Carson Whitmore stood once again, his voice filled with righteous concern for community safety and family responsibility. Your Honor, the evidence clearly demonstrates that Ms. Morrison poses an ongoing threat not just to her family, but to the broader Denver community, Whitmore declared with practiced authority. We respectfully request that the court go beyond simply correcting the inheritance issue to address the underlying public safety concerns that these proceedings have revealed. He formally requested that Judge Martinez order immediate psychological evaluation at the Colorado Mental Health Institute with potential involuntary commitment if I was deemed a danger to myself or others. The request was supported by Dr. Kramer's psychiatric assessment and endorsed by my family as a necessary intervention to protect both my welfare and community safety. Angela rose from her seat to provide additional testimony supporting the commitment request, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion as she described sleepless nights worrying about her children's safety during family gatherings where I might be present. She painted vivid pictures of my alleged threatening behavior, claiming that I had described various methods of killing enemies during combat, while staring directly at her young son and daughter. Last month at my mother's birthday party, Danette cornered my 8-year-old daughter, Emma, and began describing how soldiers eliminate targets in urban warfare. Angela testified, tears streaming down her cheeks. When I intervened, she looked at me with such hatred and said that families who betray soldiers deserve whatever consequences come their way. My children are having nightmares about their aunt coming to hurt them. Patricia supplemented Angela's testimony with her own emotional account of living in fear since my return from military service, claiming that my behavior had become increasingly erratic and threatening over the past year. She described fictional incidents where I had allegedly followed her to work, appeared unexpectedly at social gatherings, and made cryptic references to military justice and battlefield tactics. I wake up every morning wondering if today is the day she finally snaps completely, Patricia sobbed, clutching Harold's arm for support. The daughter we raised is gone, replaced by someone who sees enemies everywhere and talks about applying combat solutions to civilian problems. We just want her to get the help she desperately needs before someone gets hurt. Harold's contribution was the most calculated and potentially damaging. As a successful insurance executive with connections throughout Denver's business community, his concerns carried significant weight with Judge Martinez. He requested that the court appoint him as legal guardian with power of attorney over any assets I might receive, claiming that family oversight was essential for protecting both my welfare and the community's financial interests. Danette's inability to maintain employment or stable housing demonstrates her fundamental incapacity to manage significant financial resources, Harold explained with fake paternal concern. If she somehow retains any portion of my father's estate, she needs responsible family supervision to ensure those funds are used appropriately for her care and treatment, rather than enabling continued destructive behavior. But their most overreaching demand involved requesting that the court order me to undergo experimental treatment protocols for veteran trauma, including electroconvulsive therapy and pharmaceutical interventions that Dr. Kramer claimed were necessary to address my treatment-resistant condition. The proposed treatment plan would have required 18 months of institutional care under family supervision. Carson Whitmore presented this comprehensive intervention package as necessary protection for a veteran whose service-related trauma had progressed beyond conventional treatment options. He argued that Walter's misguided compassion had enabled my deterioration by providing financial resources that should have been directed toward intensive psychiatric care under professional and family oversight. Walter Morrison's tragic mistake was believing that financial independence would help his granddaughter, rather than enabling her destructive patterns. Whitmore concluded, "This court has the opportunity to correct that mistake while ensuring that Ms. Morrison receives the intensive treatment she desperately needs to become a productive member of society again." As Whitmore returned to his seat, the atmosphere in the courtroom felt oppressive and predetermined. Spectators whispered among themselves about the shocking revelations of veteran instability and family endangerment, while court officials prepared paperwork for what appeared to be an inevitable ruling against my inheritance and personal freedom. Harold, Patricia, and Angela exchanged satisfied glances, believing their comprehensive strategy had achieved everything they had hoped to accomplish. Not only would they seize Walter's entire estate, but they would also gain legal control over my personal life and financial future, while eliminating any possibility that I could interfere with their criminal operations. Judge Martinez appeared genuinely concerned about the public safety implications of allowing someone with my alleged psychiatric profile to remain at liberty with access to significant financial resources. The accumulated testimony had created a compelling narrative of progressive mental deterioration that threatened both family welfare and community safety. But their overconfidence had led them to reveal the true scope of their intentions, transforming what should have been a simple inheritance dispute into a comprehensive attack on my fundamental rights and freedoms. Walter had predicted exactly this escalation, knowing that my family's greed and cruelty would eventually expose their willingness to destroy anyone who threatened their criminal enterprise. Angela's detailed descriptions of my alleged threats would soon be compared against FBI surveillance records, proving that I was meeting with federal investigators during the times she claimed I was terrorizing her children. Patricia's claims about living in fear would be contradicted by evidence that she had been actively spreading lies about my mental health throughout the Denver community. Harold's request for financial oversight would be exposed as an attempt to control assets stolen from veterans through systematic fraud and identity theft. As Jennifer Walsh prepared to respond to their presentation, I remained calm and focused on the mission Walter had prepared me to complete. My family believed they had won, that their systematic character assassination had achieved its intended goal of destroying my credibility while seizing control of resources that rightfully belonged to me. They had no idea that every word of their testimony was being recorded by federal investigators, providing additional evidence of consciousness of guilt and obstruction of justice that would enhance their eventual sentences. Their overconfident revelations about my alleged mental state would soon be contrasted against professional psychiatric evaluations documenting my stability and competence. But most importantly, they had revealed their willingness to use institutional psychiatry as a weapon against veterans who pose threats to their criminal operations. Their demands for involuntary commitment and experimental treatment represented exactly the kind of systematic abuse that federal investigators had been documenting across multiple states. Walter's strategy was reaching its climactic moment. My family had exposed themselves completely, believing that their social standing and professional reputations would protect them from consequences. They had no idea that federal agents were already preparing arrest warrants based on evidence gathered during months of careful investigation. The manila envelope in Jennifer Walsh's hands contained documentation that would transform their moment of triumph into the beginning of their destruction. The federal investigation was about to become public knowledge, and my family's overconfident attacks were about to collide with the reality of comprehensive criminal charges filed under federal statutes carrying decades of prison time. Soon they would learn that their systematic exploitation of veterans had been documented, analyzed, and prepared for prosecution by the same federal agencies they had been defrauding for years. The weapons of truth, justice, and careful preparation were about to overwhelm their defenses, built on lies, manipulation, and family betrayal. Jennifer Walsh rose from her seat with deliberate calm, walking toward Judge Martinez's bench while carrying a manila envelope that contained the culmination of months of federal investigation into my family's criminal enterprise. The courtroom fell silent as she approached her professional demeanor, contrasting sharply with the emotional theatrics that had dominated the previous hour of testimony and character assassination. Your Honor, before you consider the requests made by opposing counsel, I believe the court needs to review evidence that fundamentally changes the nature of these proceedings. Jennifer announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who understood exactly how devastating the contents of her envelope would prove to be. She removed a bound document marked with FBI letterhead and federal case numbers, placing it carefully on Judge Martinez's desk while maintaining eye contact that conveyed both respect and urgency. The cover page identified the document as a comprehensive federal investigation report into veteran exploitation and systematic fraud involving the Morrison family and associated criminal conspirators. Judge Martinez accepted the document with visible confusion, clearly unprepared for the introduction of federal criminal evidence into what he had believed was a straightforward probate dispute involving family dynamics and mental health concerns. As he opened the report and began reading the executive summary, his expression transformed from confusion to shock to barely controlled outrage. This report documents a 7-year criminal conspiracy involving identity theft, insurance fraud, money laundering, and systematic exploitation of veteran benefits programs, Jennifer explained as Judge Martinez continued reading. The defendants in this probate case are the primary subjects of federal charges that include racketeering, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The silence in the courtroom became absolute as the implications of Jennifer's statement penetrated the consciousness of everyone present. Harold's confident expression dissolved into pale confusion, while Patricia's hands began trembling as she realized that their carefully constructed narrative was about to collide with federal criminal evidence. Angela leaned forward in her seat, her legal training helping her understand the catastrophic implications faster than her parents could process. Judge Martinez read through the first several pages of the FBI report with increasing amazement, discovering that Harold had been filing false death certificates claiming I had been killed in Afghanistan to collect insurance benefits and survivor payments. The evidence included bank records, forged documents, and recorded phone conversations that proved systematic fraud spanning multiple years and involving hundreds of thousands of stolen dollars. Ms. Walsh, are you telling this court that the allegations made against your client are part of a coordinated attempt to discredit a federal witness? Judge Martinez asked, his voice carrying the weight of judicial authority that had been personally affronted by the deception that had been practiced in his courtroom. That is exactly what I'm telling you, Your Honor, Jennifer replied with professional precision. Every psychiatric evaluation, every police report, and every character witness testimony presented by opposing counsel has been fabricated as part of a systematic campaign to destroy Ms. Morrison's credibility before she could testify about their criminal activities. Jennifer presented additional evidence that Dr. William Kramer had received substantial payments from Angela's law practice in exchange for providing false psychiatric evaluations designed to discredit veterans who had discovered evidence of exploitation. His collaboration with my family was part of a broader network that used mental health accusations as weapons against vulnerable veterans who posed threats to criminal operations. The revelation that Patricia's emergency room visit documenting my alleged assault had occurred while I was meeting with FBI agents provided irrefutable proof that her injuries were self-inflicted and her testimony completely fabricated. Security cameras, federal witness logs, and medical timestamps created an unshakable alibi that exposed the coordinated nature of their attack on my credibility. Judge Martinez continued reading the federal report, discovering evidence that Angela's law practice had been creating fraudulent documentation for criminals throughout Colorado, helping them exploit veteran programs and steal identities through sophisticated legal schemes designed to appear legitimate to casual inspection. Her prestigious career had been built entirely on systematic exploitation of the military community. Your Honor, the psychological profiles created by Angela Morrison demonstrate the particularly heinous nature of these crimes. Jennifer continued presenting additional evidence from the federal investigation. She was literally teaching criminals how to exploit veteran trauma and family dysfunction to steal identities and avoid detection when their victims discovered the theft. As Judge Martinez absorbed the scope of the criminal conspiracy documented in the federal report, I finally stood and walked toward his bench, carrying myself with the military bearing that 8 years of service had burned into my posture and demeanor. The contrast between my calm professionalism and my family's growing panic filled the courtroom with tension that felt almost physical. Your Honor, my grandfather Walter Morrison discovered this criminal enterprise 6 months before his death. I testified with steady voice that carried across the silent courtroom. He changed his will not just because he loved me, but because he understood that my parents and sister had built their entire lives on exploiting veterans and stealing from programs designed to help people like him and me. I explained that Walter had been feeding information to federal investigators for months, while simultaneously preparing me for the legal battle that would inevitably follow his death. His strategy required allowing my family to reveal their true character through their reaction to the inheritance before presenting evidence that would destroy their credibility and expose their criminal activities. Every attack they made on my mental health, every fabricated police report, every attempt to have me committed to psychiatric facilities was designed to prevent me from testifying about crimes they committed using my identity and military service records. I continued, my voice growing stronger as I finally told the truth that Walter had prepared me to reveal. Judge Martinez looked up from the federal report to study my demeanor, clearly comparing my composed testimony with the emotional manipulation and manufactured hysteria that had characterized my family's presentation. The contrast was stark and undeniable, revealing exactly who was telling the truth and who was desperately trying to avoid criminal prosecution. Jennifer presented the final piece of evidence, recordings of phone conversations where Harold and Patricia discussed strategies for discrediting me, including specific instructions to Dr. Kramer about the psychiatric conclusions they needed him to reach. Their own words proved consciousness of guilt and premeditated obstruction of justice that would enhance their federal sentences. Walter Morrison spent his final months documenting evidence and preparing strategies to ensure that justice would be served not just for his granddaughter, but for every veteran these criminals had exploited. Jennifer concluded, his will wasn't the product of undue influence or mental incompetence. It was the carefully considered decision of a combat veteran who understood honor sacrifice and the importance of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. As the weight of federal evidence settled over the courtroom, Harold, Patricia, and Angela sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that their overconfident attack had led them directly into the trap Walter had spent months preparing. Carson Whitmore frantically shuffled through papers, clearly realizing that he had been representing a criminal enterprise rather than concerned family members seeking to protect community welfare. Judge Martinez closed the federal report and looked directly at my family, his expression conveying judicial outrage at the systematic deception that had been practiced in his courtroom. The carefully constructed narrative of veteran instability and family concern had collapsed, completely replaced by irrefutable evidence of criminal conspiracy and witness intimidation. Mr. Whitmore, I assume your clients were unaware that federal investigators have been monitoring this probate proceeding as part of an ongoing criminal investigation, Judge Martinez asked with barely controlled anger. Before Whitmore could respond, the courtroom doors opened and federal agents entered with arrest warrants that had been prepared based on evidence gathered during months of investigation. The timing was perfect, transforming my family's moment of expected triumph into the beginning of their public humiliation and criminal prosecution. Walter's final strategy was reaching its climactic conclusion, and my family's systematic betrayal was about to face the full weight of federal justice. Their weapons of lies, manipulation, and psychiatric abuse were about to be overwhelmed by truth evidence and the accumulated power of law enforcement agencies committed to protecting veterans from exactly the kind of exploitation they had perpetrated. FBI agent Marcus Chen entered courtroom 4C precisely as Judge Martinez finished reading the federal investigation report, followed by Detective Sarah Cummings and two additional federal agents carrying arrest warrants that had been prepared based on months of comprehensive investigation into my family's criminal enterprise. The timing was perfect, transforming what should have been my family's moment of triumph into the beginning of their public destruction. Your Honor, we apologize for interrupting these proceedings, but we have federal arrest warrants for Harold Morrison, Patricia Morrison, and Angela Morrison Bradley. Agent Chen announced with professional authority that filled the suddenly silent courtroom. These warrants are based on charges of racketeering, conspiracy, identity theft, wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Judge Martinez nodded grimly, clearly relieved that the systematic deception practiced in his courtroom was about to face appropriate federal consequences. Agent Chen, please proceed with your arrests. This court will recess to allow federal law enforcement to complete their duties. Harold was the first to react, standing abruptly and attempting to project the confident authority that had served him throughout his insurance career. "This is obviously some kind of mistake," he declared with forced conviction. "We're respected members of this community with unblemished reputations. These charges are clearly the result of false information provided by someone whose mental illness makes her an unreliable witness." But Agent Chen was already approaching with handcuffs, reading Harold his Miranda rights in a calm, professional voice that cut through his desperate protests. "Harold Morrison, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud against the United States, identity theft, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." Patricia's reaction was immediate and hysterical. She collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably, as the reality of federal arrest penetrated her consciousness. Her carefully constructed image as a concerned mother and successful real estate professional crumbled, completely replaced by raw terror at the prospect of prison time and public humiliation. "This can't be happening," she wailed, clutching at Harold's arm as federal agents prepared to escort him from the courtroom. "We're good people. We've never hurt anyone. Our daughter is sick and she's making up stories because she's angry about the inheritance." Detective Cummings approached Patricia with professional sympathy but unyielding determination. "Patricia Morrison, you are under arrest for conspiracy, real estate fraud, tax, evasion, and identity theft involving veteran benefits programs. You have the right to remain silent." Angela's response was the most calculated and potentially dangerous. Her legal training allowed her to understand the federal charges and their implications faster than her parents, leading her to immediately attempt damage control and blame, shifting that might reduce her culpability while destroying her family relationships. "Officers, I want you to know that I was manipulated by my parents into participating in activities I didn't fully understand," Angela announced with desperate professional composure. "As an attorney, I should have recognized the criminal nature of their schemes, but they told me these were legitimate tax planning strategies for veteran clients." Her attempt to claim innocence while implicating Harold and Patricia demonstrated the same callous self-interest that had characterized her treatment of me throughout our childhood and adult relationship. Even facing federal charges, she was willing to destroy her parents to protect herself, revealing the fundamental absence of loyalty or family bonds that had always existed beneath her facade of professional success. But Agent Chen was prepared for exactly this response, having witnessed similar attempts at blame shifting during other white-collar criminal investigations. "Angela Morrison Bradley, you are under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, practicing law to further criminal enterprise, and creating fraudulent documentation for systematic veteran exploitation. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly advise you to exercise that right until you can consult with an attorney who specializes in federal criminal defense. Carson Whitmore watched his client's arrests with growing horror, realizing that he had been unknowingly representing a criminal organization while practicing character assassination against a federal witness. His reputation and legal career were about to suffer devastating consequences from his association with systematic veteran exploitation and obstruction of justice. Your Honor, I had no knowledge of any criminal activities, Whitmore announced desperately. My clients presented this as a routine probate dispute involving family mental health concerns. I never would have accepted representation if I had understood the true nature of their situation. Judge Martinez looked at Whitmore with a mixture of sympathy and disgust, understanding that attorneys sometimes became unwitting accomplices to criminal enterprises, but noting that professional due diligence should have revealed inconsistencies in my family's narrative. Mr. Whitmore, you will need to address your professional obligations with the Colorado Bar Association. This court is primarily concerned with ensuring that justice is served in the underlying criminal matters. As federal agents escorted my family toward the courtroom exit in handcuffs, I remained seated beside Jennifer Walsh, watching the systematic destruction of people who had spent years trying to destroy me. The emotional impact was complex and overwhelming, combining satisfaction at seeing justice served with sadness at witnessing the complete collapse of relationships that had defined my entire life. Harold turned back as agents led him through the courtroom doors, his expression conveying hatred and blame, rather than remorse or acceptance of responsibility. "This is all your fault, Danette," he shouted with venom that revealed his true character more clearly than any federal evidence could demonstrate. "You've destroyed our entire family because you couldn't accept that you were never good enough to inherit anything." Patricia's final words were equally revealing, sobbing accusations that demonstrated her complete inability to understand the moral dimensions of their crimes. "We gave you everything," she wailed as Detective Cummings guided her toward the exit. "We raised you and supported you, and this is how you repay us, by sending us to prison." Angela said nothing as agents escorted her from the courtroom, but her expression conveyed cold calculation rather than remorse or family concern. Even facing federal charges, she was already planning defense strategies that would minimize her culpability while maximizing the consequences for Harold and Patricia. The complete absence of family loyalty confirmed everything Walter had understood about their fundamental character. The spectators who had gathered to witness what they expected to be my humiliation and psychiatric commitment instead witnessed the public exposure of a criminal conspiracy that had exploited veteran programs and stolen identities for years. Their shocked whispers filled the courtroom as news reporters frantically took notes about the dramatic reversal that had transformed a probate hearing into federal criminal arrests. Judge Martinez called for a 30-minute recess to allow federal agents to complete their arrests and remove the defendants from the courthouse. As the courtroom emptied, I sat quietly beside Jennifer Walsh, processing the emotional impact of watching my family's systematic deception finally face appropriate consequences. "Walter knew exactly how this would unfold," Jennifer said softly, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. "He understood that your family's overconfidence and desperation would lead them to make exactly the mistakes that federal investigators needed to complete their case." Agent Chen approached our table as courthouse security restored order to the disrupted proceedings. "Ms. Morrison, your testimony and cooperation have been essential to this investigation," he said with professional respect. "The arrests today are just the beginning. Your family's criminal network extends across 6 states and involves dozens of co-conspirators who will be facing similar federal charges." Sarah Cummings added that the financial recovery would be substantial, potentially returning over $2 million to veteran programs and individual victims who had been exploited by the systematic fraud. Your courage in coming forward has protected countless other veterans who might otherwise have become victims of similar schemes. As we prepared for Judge Martinez to reconvene the probate hearing and address the inheritance dispute that had started this entire confrontation, I finally understood the full scope of Walter's final gift. He hadn't just provided me with financial resources or evidence of criminal activity. He had given me the opportunity to transform years of suffering into protection for the entire veteran community, ensuring that my family's betrayal would serve a greater purpose of justice and prevention. The unraveling had begun, but the true victory would come when federal prosecutors ensured that every aspect of the criminal conspiracy faced appropriate consequences, and when systemic reforms protected other veterans from the kind of exploitation that had defined my family's approach to military service and sacrifice. Over the following 72 hours, the federal investigation expanded into the largest veteran exploitation case in American history as agents executed search warrants across Colorado, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Wyoming. Carson Whitmore's law firm became the epicenter of a criminal enterprise that had systematically defrauded veteran programs for over a decade, generating millions of dollars in illegal profits through sophisticated identity theft and document falsification schemes. Federal agents discovered that Whitmore Stevenson and Associates had been operating as a front for criminal activities that extended far beyond my family's local operations in Denver. The firm's client list included prominent families throughout the Mountain West region who had purchased fraudulent veteran status to avoid taxes, secure federal contracts, and access benefits reserved for military personnel and their survivors. Agent Chen established an expanded command center in the federal building to coordinate the multi-state investigation that now involved over 40 federal agents, 12 state and local law enforcement agencies, and specialized units from the Department of Veterans Affairs, Internal Revenue Service, and Department of Defense. The scope of the criminal conspiracy dwarfed even Walter's comprehensive documentation, reaching into corporate boardrooms, political organizations, and professional associations that had exploited veteran programs for competitive advantage. "Your family wasn't running an independent criminal operation," Agent Chen explained during our debriefing at the FBI field office. They were regional managers for a network that specifically recruited attorneys, medical professionals, and government employees to facilitate systematic exploitation of veteran benefits and identity theft. The investigation revealed that Carson Whitmore's firm had trained over 60 attorneys across 5 states in methods for creating fraudulent veteran documentation, establishing fake veteran-owned businesses, and exploiting disability programs through false medical evaluations. Angela's law practice served as a training center where criminals learned to identify vulnerable veterans and develop strategies for stealing their identities while discrediting them if they discovered the theft. Detective Sarah Cummings led raids on medical offices throughout Colorado, discovering that Dr. William Kramer was part of a network that included 15 psychiatrists, 23 general practitioners, and dozens of social workers who provided false documentation supporting fraudulent disability claims. The medical professionals had been specifically recruited for their willingness to diagnose veterans with mental illnesses based on information provided by criminal conspirators rather than direct patient evaluation. Dr. Kramer alone provided over 300 false psychiatric evaluations to support fraudulent veteran disability claims. Sarah reported during our daily briefings, his collaboration with your sister's law practice helped criminals steal approximately $4.7 million from veteran programs across Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico. The financial investigation uncovered money laundering operations that had converted stolen veteran benefits into legitimate business investments, real estate portfolios, and offshore accounts that funded the expansion of criminal activities into additional states and victim populations. Patricia's real estate success had been built entirely on systematic fraud, but her operations were small compared to criminal enterprises in Phoenix, Salt Lake City, and Albuquerque that had stolen tens of millions of dollars using similar methods. Jennifer Walsh coordinated with federal prosecutors from multiple districts to ensure that the expanding case would result in comprehensive charges against every participant in the criminal network. The complexity of the conspiracy required careful coordination between jurisdictions to prevent defendants from escaping prosecution through legal technicalities or jurisdictional disputes. This case will establish precedents for federal prosecution of organized veteran exploitation, Jennifer explained during one of our preparation sessions. Your family's crimes were particularly heinous, but they were part of a much larger pattern of systematic abuse that targeted the military community throughout the Mountain West. The most shocking discovery involved connections between the veteran exploitation network and legitimate businesses that had purchased fraudulent veteran status to qualify for federal contracts reserved for veteran-owned enterprises. Major construction companies, technology firms, and consulting businesses had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to obtain fake veteran credentials that gave them competitive advantages in government contracting. Colonel James Richardson from the Colorado National Guard provided testimony, documenting how the fraudulent veteran-owned businesses had displaced legitimate veteran entrepreneurs, depriving authentic military families of economic opportunities, while enriching criminals who had never served their country. The systematic nature of the fraud had undermined federal programs designed to help veterans transition to civilian careers and build successful businesses. These criminals didn't just steal money from veteran programs, Colonel Richardson testified during federal grand jury proceedings. They stole opportunities from veterans who had actually earned the right to participate in these programs through their service and sacrifice. The economic impact on the legitimate veteran business community has been devastating. The investigation also revealed that several government employees had been receiving payments for providing insider information about veteran benefit investigations, disability evaluations, and program audits that allowed criminals to avoid detection and modify their schemes to stay ahead of law enforcement. The corruption extended into the Department of Veterans Affairs, state veteran agencies, and local government offices responsible for verifying veteran status and processing benefit claims. Agent Marcus Chen discovered that the criminal network had been monitoring federal investigation activities through corrupt government contacts, allowing them to identify and target veterans who might expose their operations. My family's psychological warfare against me was part of a systematic strategy used against dozens of other veterans who had discovered evidence of exploitation. Your case broke open this entire conspiracy because Walter Morrison's investigation was conducted independently of government agencies that had been compromised by criminal infiltration, Agent Chen explained. His military intelligence background taught him to assume that criminal networks would have inside sources, so he built his case using only civilian investigators and retired military personnel who couldn't be influenced by active corruption. As federal prosecutors prepared comprehensive indictments against over 100 defendants across 5 states, the investigation revealed that the veteran exploitation network had generated over $40 million in illegal profits since 2010. The systematic nature of the crimes required enhanced federal penalties that could result in life imprisonment for conspiracy leaders and decades of incarceration for regional coordinators like my family. U.S. Attorney Amanda Stevens announced that the prosecution would seek maximum sentences under federal racketeering statutes while simultaneously pursuing civil asset forfeiture to recover stolen funds for distribution to legitimate veteran programs and individual victims. The comprehensive approach would ensure that every aspect of the criminal enterprise faced appropriate legal consequences. This investigation demonstrates the federal government's commitment to protecting veterans from systematic exploitation and ensuring that those who would profit from military service face severe criminal penalties, Stevens declared during a press conference announcing the expanded charges. The defendants in this case betrayed not just individual veterans, but the entire military community that depends on these programs for support and recognition of their service. As the scope of the criminal conspiracy became clear, I finally understood that Walter's final mission extended far beyond protecting me from family exploitation. He had identified a national security threat that undermined veteran programs and military recruitment by demonstrating that civilian criminals could profit from military service without facing consequences for their exploitation of those who actually served. The federal investigation was transforming into a comprehensive effort to protect the integrity of veteran programs and ensure that military service retained its honored status in American society. My family's betrayal had exposed a criminal network that threatened the fundamental relationship between civilians and the military community, requiring federal intervention to preserve trust and prevent systematic abuse. Walter's strategy had succeeded beyond even his comprehensive planning, transforming years of suffering into protection for the entire veteran community, while establishing legal precedents that would prevent similar exploitation for generations. The broader conspiracy was finally being exposed, and justice would be both thorough and lasting. 6 months after the dramatic courtroom arrests that exposed my family's criminal enterprise, Federal Judge Patricia Williamson presided over the sentencing hearing that would determine the consequences for their systematic exploitation of veteran programs and benefits. The federal courthouse in Denver was packed with veterans, law enforcement officials, and media representatives who had followed the investigation that ultimately resulted in charges against 112 defendants across 6 states. Harold Morrison, wearing an orange federal prison jumpsuit instead of his expensive business suits, sat beside his court-appointed attorney as Judge Williamson read the comprehensive federal charges that would define the remainder of his life. His conviction on racketeering, conspiracy, identity theft, wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice carried a cumulative sentence of 18 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Mr. Morrison, your crimes represent a particularly heinous betrayal of trust and family obligation. Judge Williamson declared with judicial authority that filled the silent courtroom. You systematically exploited your own daughter's military service while spreading lies about her mental health to cover your criminal activities. Your behavior demonstrates a complete absence of honor, integrity, or respect for the military community that your daughter served with distinction. Patricia Morrison received a sentence of 14 years in federal prison for her role in real estate fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to defraud veteran programs. Her sobbing pleas for mercy were undermined by evidence that she had personally stolen over $400,000 using fraudulent veteran credentials, while simultaneously destroying my reputation in the Denver community through systematic character assassination. Mrs. Morrison, your deliberate targeting of vulnerable veterans and your systematic abuse of programs designed to help military families demonstrates a level of callousness that requires substantial incarceration to protect the public and deter similar crimes. Judge Williamson continued. Your actions have caused immeasurable harm not just to individual victims, but to the integrity of veteran support systems throughout Colorado. Angela Morrison Bradley faced the most severe consequences due to her role as the legal architect of the criminal conspiracy. Her law license had been permanently revoked following Colorado Bar Association hearings that revealed her systematic creation of fraudulent documentation for criminal enterprises. The federal sentence of 22 years reflected her leadership role in training other attorneys to exploit veteran programs and her creation of psychological profiles used to target vulnerable veterans. Ms. Morrison Bradley, your abuse of legal education and professional credentials to facilitate systematic veteran exploitation represents one of the most serious breaches of attorney ethics this court has encountered. Judge Williamson announced, Your transformation of legal practice into criminal enterprise has damaged public trust in the legal profession while causing devastating harm to the military community. Carson Whitmore received a sentence of 8 years in federal prison after cooperating with prosecutors and providing evidence against other members of the criminal network. His law firm was permanently dissolved, and his legal assets were forfeited to fund victim compensation programs. The Colorado Bar Association imposed additional sanctions that prevented him from practicing law in any jurisdiction for the remainder of his life. Dr. William Kramer and the other medical professionals who had provided false psychiatric evaluations faced federal charges for healthcare fraud conspiracy and providing false documentation to defraud government programs. Their sentences ranged from 6 to 12 years in federal prison with permanent loss of medical licenses and exclusion from all federal healthcare programs. The comprehensive prosecution resulted in the recovery of over $47 million in criminal proceeds that were distributed to veteran programs, individual victims, and system improvements designed to prevent similar exploitation in the future. The financial restitution represented the largest recovery in a veteran exploitation case in American legal history. But the most meaningful recognition came from the veteran community itself, which honored my courage in exposing the criminal conspiracy despite the personal cost and family destruction involved in seeking justice. The veterans of foreign wars presented me with their highest civilian honor for service to the veteran community, while the disabled American veterans established an annual award recognizing advocates who protect veterans from exploitation and fraud. Master Sergeant Lisa Thompson, my former squad leader from Afghanistan, delivered a keynote address at the VFW ceremony that placed my actions in the context of military values and service to fellow veterans. Her words provided validation that transcended family approval or civilian recognition, connecting my civilian courage to the military principles that had guided my service overseas. Danette Morrison demonstrated the same courage in civilian life that she showed on the battlefield. Master Sergeant Thompson declared to an audience of over 800 veterans and their families. She protected her fellow veterans from systematic exploitation, just as she protected her fellow soldiers during combat operations. Her actions exemplify the highest traditions of military service and veteran advocacy. Colonel James Richardson presented me with a special recognition from the Colorado National Guard for exposing criminal activities that had undermined veteran programs and damaged military recruitment efforts throughout the state. His presentation emphasized that my investigation had protected not just current veterans, but future military personnel who depended on civilian support and respect for military service. Staff Sergeant Morrison's investigation and testimony have strengthened the relationship between civilian and military communities by ensuring that those who would exploit military service face appropriate consequences, Colonel Richardson explained. Her courage has preserved the integrity of veteran programs and maintained public trust in institutions designed to support military families. The federal investigation led to comprehensive reforms in Veteran Benefit Administration identity, verification procedures, and oversight mechanisms designed to detect and prevent systematic fraud. The Department of Veterans Affairs implemented new protocols requiring multiple verification sources for benefit claims and established specialized units to investigate exploitation schemes targeting vulnerable veterans. Agent Marcus Chen and Detective Sarah Cummings were promoted within their respective agencies in recognition of their leadership in exposing the largest veteran exploitation network in American history. Their investigative methods became training standards for law enforcement agencies nationwide, ensuring that similar criminal enterprises would face rapid detection and comprehensive prosecution. Jennifer Walsh received recognition from the American Bar Association for her advocacy on behalf of veteran victims and her development of legal strategies that protected witnesses from retaliation while ensuring comprehensive prosecution of criminal conspiracies. Her work established precedents that strengthened protections for veterans who expose exploitation and fraud. U.S. Attorney Amanda Stevens used the case to secure additional federal funding for veteran protection programs and enhanced penalties for crimes targeting military personnel and their families. The prosecution demonstrated federal commitment to protecting veterans from systematic exploitation, while sending clear warnings to potential criminals that such activities would face severe consequences. This case represents more than successful prosecution of individual criminals, Stevens declared during a press conference announcing the final sentences. It demonstrates that our federal justice system will aggressively protect veterans from those who would exploit their service for personal gain. The sentences imposed today send a clear message that crimes against veterans will be investigated thoroughly and punished severely. As I sat in the federal courthouse listening to Judge Williamson impose sentences that would ensure my family spent decades in prison, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction, sadness, and relief that justice had finally been served. The people who had raised me, rejected me, and tried to destroy me were facing appropriate consequences for their systematic betrayal of military values and veteran welfare. But the most important result was the protection these prosecutions would provide to other veterans who might otherwise have faced similar exploitation. Walter's final mission had succeeded beyond his most optimistic projections, transforming personal betrayal into systemic reforms that would protect the entire veteran community for generations. The recognition from veteran organizations, law enforcement agencies, and federal prosecutors validated Walter's assessment of my character and potential. He had seen in me not just a granddaughter worthy of inheritance, but a veteran capable of completing a mission that protected thousands of fellow service members from systematic exploitation and abuse. Justice had been served, recognition had been earned, and the veteran community was safer because of Walter's careful planning and my willingness to complete the mission he had prepared for me. The battle was over, and honor had triumphed over betrayal, truth over deception, and military values over criminal conspiracy. 2 years after the federal sentencing hearing that sent my family to prison for their systematic exploitation of veteran programs, I stood in the lobby of the Morrison Veterans Support Center, a comprehensive facility I had established using Walter's inheritance combined with federal recovery funds from the criminal investigation. The building occupied an entire city block in downtown Denver, providing legal aid counseling services, job training, temporary housing, and advocacy support for veterans throughout the Mountain West region. The morning sunshine streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated a bronze plaque honoring Walter Morrison's vision of protecting veterans from exploitation while helping them transition successfully to civilian life. Below his military photograph and Purple Heart citation, an inscription read, "Dedicated to all veterans who understand that service to country extends beyond military discharge and includes protecting fellow service members from those who would exploit their sacrifice." Master Sergeant Lisa Thompson approached, carrying a thick folder of applications from veterans seeking services at the center, her expression reflecting the satisfaction that came from meaningful work protecting vulnerable military families. She had accepted my invitation to serve as program coordinator after retiring from active duty, bringing her leadership experience and deep understanding of veteran challenges to our comprehensive support mission. "We've got 37 new applications this week," she reported with professional pride. Word is spreading throughout the veteran community that this place actually helps people instead of just making promises. The job training program has a 93% placement rate, and our legal aid unit just recovered $200,000 in stolen benefits for victims of identity theft. Detective Sarah Cummings joined our morning briefing, having taken early retirement from Denver Police, to direct our fraud investigation unit that worked closely with federal agencies to identify and expose exploitation schemes before they could harm significant numbers of veterans. Her expertise in financial crimes provided essential protection for veterans who might otherwise become victims of systematic fraud. The early warning system is working exactly as Walter envisioned. Sarah explained, spreading case files across the conference table. "We've identified 12 potential exploitation schemes in the past 6 months and provided evidence to federal investigators that resulted in comprehensive prosecutions before criminals could establish extensive victim networks." Agent Marcus Chen, now assigned to a specialized federal task force based at our center, coordinated with law enforcement agencies across multiple states to ensure that the prosecution precedents established by my family's case were applied consistently to protect veterans from systematic exploitation. His work had expanded beyond criminal investigation to include prevention education and policy development. The Morrison case changed how federal agencies approach veteran protection. Marcus reported during our weekly coordination meeting. "We've established protocols that assume systematic exploitation rather than isolated incidents, leading to much more comprehensive investigations and stronger prosecutions. The deterrent effect has been substantial." Jennifer Walsh had accepted my invitation to serve as chief legal counsel for the center, focusing her practice exclusively on veteran advocacy and protection from exploitation. Her expertise in federal law and veteran issues provided essential support for veterans navigating complex benefit systems while protecting them from predatory schemes designed to steal their identities and resources. "Legal aid requests have increased 400% since we opened," Jennifer explained with satisfaction that reflected her commitment to protecting vulnerable veterans. "Most cases involve identity theft, benefit fraud, or family exploitation, similar to what you experienced. The perpetrators assume that veteran trauma and family dysfunction will prevent their victims from seeking help or filing complaints." Dr. Elizabeth Harper had established a comprehensive mental health program at the center that provided trauma-informed care, specifically designed for veterans who had experienced exploitation, identity theft, or family betrayal. Her research on veteran victimization had led to new treatment protocols that addressed the unique psychological challenges faced by veterans whose service had been used against them by criminals or family members. The psychological impact of veteran exploitation extends far beyond financial loss. Dr. Harper explained during our monthly case review meetings. When criminals use military service as a weapon against veterans, it damages their sense of identity, self-worth, and trust in civilian institutions. Recovery requires specialized treatment that validates their service while helping them rebuild confidence in their ability to navigate civilian life successfully. Colonel Richardson from the Colorado National Guard served on our advisory board, ensuring that active military personnel understood the resources available to protect them from exploitation, while providing connections between our center and military commands throughout the region. His involvement demonstrated military leadership's commitment to protecting veterans from the kind of systematic abuse that had defined my family's criminal enterprise. This center represents the military community's commitment to protecting its own, Colonel Richardson declared during our annual fundraising dinner attended by over 600 veterans, military families, and civilian supporters. Staff Sergeant Morrison transformed her personal suffering into protection for thousands of fellow veterans who might otherwise have faced similar exploitation. Her example demonstrates that military service continues long after discharge through commitment to protecting fellow service members. The success stories emerge daily as veterans found employment, recovered stolen benefits, escaped abusive family situations, and rebuilt their lives with comprehensive support from staff who understood their challenges because they had faced similar obstacles. Former homeless veterans became business owners, exploitation victims became advocates, and isolated individuals found community among fellow service members who shared their experiences and values. Maria Santos, a Navy veteran who had been exploited by her ex-husband's systematic theft of her disability benefits, now managed our financial counseling program while pursuing a master's degree in social work. Her transformation from victim to advocate demonstrated the center's effectiveness in empowering veterans to rebuild their lives while helping others facing similar challenges. "This place saved my life." Maria explained during a staff meeting where she presented quarterly outcomes data. I came here broken, homeless, and convinced that I was worthless because my own family had stolen from me. Now I help other veterans understand that exploitation reflects the criminal's moral failures, not any inadequacy on their part. James Walker, an Army veteran whose identity had been stolen by his brother's criminal enterprise, completed job training at our center and became assistant manager at a veteran-owned construction company that partnered with our employment placement program. His success represented the kind of comprehensive recovery that Walter had envisioned when he planned the center's comprehensive approach to veteran support. I thought my military service was worthless because my family used it to hurt me. James reflected during his graduation ceremony from our job training program. This center taught me that my service has value, that I have skills and dignity that no one can steal, and that I can build a successful civilian life surrounded by people who understand and respect military values. As evening approached and the center prepared to close for another day of successful operations, I walked through the facility that had become the tangible expression of Walter's final mission and my commitment to transforming suffering into service. Every program, every service, every success story represented victory over the criminal exploitation that had once threatened to destroy not just my life, but my fundamental belief in justice and human decency. The call to action question that had emerged from our work was simple but profound. Have you ever witnessed someone using their position of trust to exploit vulnerable people? And what steps did you take to protect the victims and ensure accountability? The responses from our community demonstrated growing awareness that exploitation thrives in silence, but cannot survive when good people choose to act with courage and determination. I encouraged everyone who heard our story to like and subscribe to veteran advocacy channels that educated communities about exploitation prevention, to share information about resources available to veterans facing identity theft or family abuse, and to comment about their own experiences with protecting vulnerable people from systematic exploitation. The center had become more than a service provider. It had become a symbol of transformation, demonstrating that the most devastating betrayals could be converted into the strongest foundations for protecting others from similar harm. Walter's inheritance had provided the financial foundation, but the real strength came from veterans who chose to transform their pain into purpose and their suffering into service to fellow service members. Thank you for following this journey from betrayal to justice, from exploitation to empowerment, from family destruction to community building. May your own challenges become sources of strength that help you protect others, and may you always remember that our greatest victories come not from avoiding suffering, but from choosing to ensure that our suffering serves a purpose greater than ourselves. The Morrison Veterans Support Center continues to serve veterans throughout the Mountain West, proving every day that Walter Morrison's vision was correct. The best way to honor military service is to protect those who served from anyone who would exploit their sacrifice for personal gain. Justice served, mission accomplished, and service continues.